I'm Ian Williams, a trustee for the Griffin Poetry Prize. Today I'm speaking with the Jamaican poet Ishion Hutchinson, author of School of Instructions, published by FSG, and a finalist for the 2024 Griffin Poetry Prize. Hi, Ishion.
Hello, Ian. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to meet you. So, poetry is hard to describe, but I'm going to give you this challenge here. How would you describe your collection, School of Instructions?
Okay. How would I describe it?
Hmm.
I would describe it as a book-length poem that deals with the experience of West Indian volunteer soldiers in World War One, and a second narrative of the life of a boy growing up in Eastern Jamaica in the parishes of St. Thomas and Portland during the 1990s. So it's an interweaving of two different narratives, two different timelines, but it's sort of a collision of psychic meditation on what it means to live in a context where imperial forces bear down on lives. And sometimes that manifests itself in war, as in World War One, but also with the colonial background of the boy in the poem, sort of dealing with the aftermath of empire.
I think you had me at psychic meditation. That phrase there. So yes, there are the two storylines, right? There's Godspeed, the boy in rural Jamaica, and then there is this sort of regiment of soldiers over
Yes.
there. And so like either of those could be a collection in themselves. There's lots of lyric energy with Godspeed and lots of like historical interest with the other storyline. But you must have thought that you were gaining something by putting them together. And so, why this decision in particular to bridge 100 years or so and to put these very different historical moments together? Why that decision?
Well, there are multiple reasons. I think one of the first reasons is just being a lyric poet, wherein one of the poet's task is to reimagine time, to see time as something not just linear, but something moving in multiple directions at once. So I wanted to harness times in these in that manner by bringing as close as possible these two narratives without any form of pause or difference in the stories. It's very risky
It
because
is.
it's appropriating across space and time. But I do think that as narratives, they share certain things in common. For instance, when I was in the Imperial War Museum doing research on this poem, because it began as a commission to go to the Imperial War Museum in 2018 during the centenary year of the end of World War One. I saw images of the Black soldiers from the Caribbean in uniforms, in their regimental uniforms, and it struck me that those uniforms looked exactly like the kind of uniforms I wore as a student in the 1990s, going to high school in Jamaica. So how is it that to see these two things, the similarities, it was very emotional to look at that and to look at the pictures of those men, those boys who were, you could call them boys, the volunteer soldiers. They were so young, and they seemed to in those images to be posing for the camera, to be playful, and you couldn't even tell in some of those images that in the background, right there and then, there was a war going on, whether they were stationed in Europe or in the Middle East, as most of this book takes place there. So I
Mm,
wanted to find symbols, little effigies that connect across time and space, that bring
mm.
these two figures together, but also want to highlight the massive differences between the two as well, but to put it all in one crucible and
Mhm.
see how it goes.
Yeah, like when you talk about the uniforms being similar between like a public school or a school in Jamaica and the war, the battlefield, it suggests that there's a kind of like interchangeability too, right? That
Yeah.
had Godspeed been born 100 years earlier, this would have been his place. And I don't know if you think about this from time to time, what your life would have been, if you were born 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Um, yeah, what a different life you'd be living. That's not, I don't, you don't have to answer that. Um, but maybe let's talk a
But
little bit a bit.
I do think about it though.
Oh, go for
I've
it.
thought about it. No, 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 no. I've fantasized about it. You know, there are certain periods. For instance, in Jamaica, I was born in the 70s during the emergence of reggae and dub, because that's my favorite period of Jamaican music. And I would have wanted to be a studio musician, either playing sessions with the Wailers or Burning Spears or you name any of those figures, the Congos, or more ambitiously, I would want to be a producer, someone who actually work on the console and mix music and to create the sound that we now in our current moment have inherited. So that's
Mhm.
one of my fantasies to if I were born a couple decades
But
early.
you'd still be a kind of poet then, right? In that case, right? It's not this idea that each life has only one trajectory, right? The sense is if you were born in this, if you were sort of age in the 70s, then your life would have been very different, right? And still remarkable. Um,
But
and still yours. Hmm.
I
Um,
would hope so, yes.
so um, uh, do you think that Black life is inherently heroic? Okay. And I'm phrasing that just because you're brushing up Godspeed's life against these soldiers. And we've got sort of ordinariness against acts of like adventure and heroism. Do you
Yeah.
think the average Black life is heroic?
Well, I think that because the average Black life is one of navigating powers
Hmm.
far greater than that life that is in many ways trying to erase that life, that one is forced to occupy a position of heroism.
Hmm.
Heroism doesn't always mean an act of active courage. Courage, can take different form. I consider my grandmother a hero for the way in which she lived her life. I could say the same for most of the people that I've known. Who I look up to as example of what it means to be a human, someone who lives by conscience and kindness and compassion. I think it takes a lot of effort to be that way, in spite of the many things that are trying to make you not exist.
Mhm.
So, and in the case of these West Indian soldiers, oftentimes when you look at the primary and secondary sources, they were described as cannon fodders. So, in a
Mhm.
sense, dispensable um, sort of mule of war, mule of burden. These soldiers were the ones who carried the equipments across vast landscapes. They were actively digging trenches in Europe and in the desert during the Middle Eastern campaign. And they were not allowed to bear arms. They were in segregated regiments. So could you imagine that they are there fighting for England and for the idea of civilization, but yet they were treated so uncivil.
Mhm.
There's a lot of irony within that, but just
Right.
to think of it, and during the course of writing this book, it constantly surprised me how much the soldiers were victims of empire at the same time when they were there in order to, and sometimes it's difficult to admit, to fight for the soul of empire, for to at least the British Empire to be involved with its new direction that this modern warfare was going to introduce, bring into the world, that they volunteered to go. And there are complex reasons too beyond just that one, but it's one of the reasons why they went, and yet still they were treated so poorly.
Yeah, it continues to puzzle me, like after reading the collection. Like what is the motivation? Why would someone do this? And you're right about sort of that complex relationship. Is it a sense of duty, a sense of belonging to the colonial
Yeah,
center? Is it a sense of patriotism, like emerging, the desire to exert the will on one's destiny? What is what is the appeal of why would a black soldier fight for on behalf of the people that is really like oppressing them?
it's difficult to say one reason, because the soldiers, and it was great to go to the Imperial War Museum and see various sort of documents that point to different stories why people went. Um, One of the reasons that I find fascinating is that they went in order to prove that they, and this falls back into the old sort of patriarchal binaries, but they went in order to prove that they were men, that they were
Mm,
people who would take on their own destiny, but
yeah.
caught within the geopolitics of that moment. Um, it was a it to go to war would mean you are making the ultimate sacrifice that one could in one's own lifetime to show that you, yes, are patriarchal, a patriot of you know England for sure, but also what England stands for in relation to Jamaica and other Caribbean islands. But this was just another station towards independence. So it's a strange thing. Jamaica
Yes.
gained, and many of the other Caribbean countries gained independence in the 60s. So a good a couple of decades after World War One. But these veterans who returned to various islands became very active in national movements and independent movements. They were very active in the Marcus Garvey movement and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
part of a long story of how a people who have, since the moment they were trafficked from the continent of Africa to the new world, have been agitating for their freedom and full independence. So
Mm-hmm.
this part is just
Yeah.
this the story of of World War One and Two are parts of that bigger narrative as well. So it's
Mm-hmm.
something of massive epical scale.
Mm-hmm. That's a really smart connection, though, from World War One. This kind of through line towards like independence and liberation as this being part of the process. And it's almost like um, a, a, a segment of the population needs to leave the island, right? And not
Yes.
necessarily go to England, but needs to be
Yeah.
out in the world to see
Yeah.
themselves resituated, recontextualized, all of that, and then to
Mhm.
look back there, right? And then to go back. That leaving and going back, no matter what the conditions or circumstances, seems to be like really important in all of this.
Oh yes, that's, you earlier used the word adventure, and though I
Mm,
use it with as much caution as possible, I have never been to a war. I don't live in a war zone,
mm,
so I have to speak with respect where this is concerned. Um, but this adventure of go of just setting out is is perhaps the only way any form of real change can be possible. If people weren't leaving the safety and comfort of and sometimes you don't exist in safety and comfort, it could be for other reasons,
mm,
but moving away from home is a form of daring. And it's in a sense too what the poet does. The poet um, has to sort of see the world, that could be a very physical sort of move, but to have experience beyond the experience of the day-to-day ordinary
Mm.
home life, broadens the horizon, and I think makes one wants to think of the socio-political conditions of the world in much sort of bigger terms, but always
Mm.
returning to home, returning home to,
Yeah.
because that's where one's work truly is, where one works with much more vigor,
Mm.
um, because you know who you're working with. You're working with the people who have given you the stories to, and the language even to exist and to want to uh, to to take on the delight and burden of being a poet or a writer, and to bear witness to what makes you who you are.
Mm. Okay, two more directions based on what you just said there. And the first is this is from your publisher, FSG. They describe the book as having a documentary shape that is interrupted by sudden lyric effusions, right? Really great phrasing there. Tell me about that documentary shape part of it. You mentioned the research a little bit. How did you go about researching this project?
So the project originated because I was commissioned to go to the Imperial War Museum in 2018, the centenary year of World War One, directly to see what I could find in relation to West Indian soldiers who fought in the war, and to create poems out of this, or to actually, I was asked to just write one single poem. But when I
That
started
was just a
to,
book long, right?
yeah, I it it I was very much taken with what I found. I didn't know a lot about the West Indian soldiers' involvement, so that was a completely new history for me, and it excited me to learn about what I was discovering, and but to realize that a single poem, I realized it from the moment I went to the archives, the Imperial Museum archives, that a single poem wouldn't do. And I was very much haunted by the voices that I found in the archives. The material, they were, the material was sort of diaries, war diaries, most of them kept by white British officers, little memorabilia and stuff like that. Nothing too of a straightforward narrative. So I had to, in a way, imagine or impose a narrative on the things that I found. But just to look at the names, for instance, of soldiers listed in a war diary, or in any form of official document, and seeing those names, and they remind me of the names of people I know from home, just struck a personal chord. So I wanted to
Mm.
honor the names of the dead, and they stuck with me. And so the poem, what became this book, because it's a single poem, grew, and it took about 7 years to
Mm.
finalize.
Right, right. And earlier you'd mentioned English, not the people, but the language. And
Mhm.
there's such a range of like Englishes even, right, in your collection here. Tell me about like the range of Englishes in your life.
Well, yes, there's so many Englishes and other languages.
Yeah.
I would say we Jamaicans have a distinct language from English. The Jamaican English, there is that Jamaican Patois, which is separate from Jamaican English. So I grew up in a bilingual context. Of course, the formation of Jamaican Patois it actually tells the story best about
Mm.
Jamaican history, because it's that uh, thing that was imposed on us, the language, violently. But through a form of ingenuity, the will to survive, a new language emerged, which is Jamaican Patois. Yes, it shares a very strong relationship with English, and if you listen very keenly to it as a non-Jamaican Patois speaker, you might be able to get the context. But what's most essential is really the music. The music of the
Mm.
language is very different from English and other Englishes. And it's a rich uh, music, a music that has a very intense center, deep bass, like the music of Jamaica, heavy, but has a certain levity as well. You want to dance to this language, and I feel fortunate to have grown up with it and various forms of it, and was given permission to enjoy the music, repeat the music, but also advance something of my own using this music.
Mm. Could we hear a part of the book? Can
Oh,
you read a
yes,
poem or a section for us?
happy to. Yes, I'll read from a section which is late in the book, and it's poem 46. He braided his many dreadlocks into one thick Horus lock and implemented a fixed fee to read the newspaper on a plaza in Jane Ash Corner Square. I am troubled with my head and cannot stand the sound of the guns. Number 2776 Private Winston Thomas of Clarendon told the courts. I reported to the doctor, and he gave me no medicine or anything, sir. Everything hurts me, sir. Summon these things for healing. His grandmother's torn scarf self-hemmed with camphor, and basil fading through fading saffron. Her dress intact on the clothesline awaits the shape of the breeze from Amity Hall. It was still pitch dark night when Godspeed shook his jam jar of fireflies, and blinky blinks illuminated the woodworm boards and desolate Golgotha.
Well, Aishan, thank you
Thank
for
you.
reading and thank you for talking
My
with me
pleasure.
today. I've been speaking with Ishion Hutchinson, author of School of Instructions and a finalist for the 2024 Griffin Poetry Prize.